Welcome to the Revelation discussion guide for the letters to Philadelphia and Laodicea. First, I want to apologize for the slowness of getting this video out. I was slow in getting it to Jeff, and then we had technical difficulties in getting it uploaded to YouTube. So hopefully this still catches some of you while there's still some benefit. Anyway, the discussion here between these two churches, I think, presents an interesting contrast between Philadelphia and Laodicea. As Jeff mentioned in his message, the contrast between these two churches couldn't be greater. So with that, I'm going to jump right into the discussion questions and give you some tips on the intent behind those questions. So the first question is this: unlike the Philadelphian church, we are a large church with a lot of resources. So if size and resources are not the essential ingredients of a successful church, how should we think about the success or failures that we have in ministry, and how should this affect the way we approach new ministry opportunities? I think in a lot of ways, Cornerstone is like Philadelphia in that we have lots of open doors. But I think one way that we're different than Philadelphia is that we actually have a lot of resources at our disposal. Jesus prefaces his remarks to the church at Philadelphia and says that because they are of limited strength. So I think that's an area where we have a difference with Philadelphia, is that we do have a lot of resources and opportunities available to us. So if that's the case, how do we think about whether or not we're successful, and how do we measure success? I think this question should prompt us to think about things like attendance and giving. While those can be indicators of a successful church, I think we need to be cautious about using those as the only measures of success, because certainly there are a lot of large megachurches out there that are mile wide and inch deep, and they're doing great in terms of attendance and budget. But in reality, there is no spiritual life, or worse yet, they're sending people down the wrong path when it comes to their spiritual life. So I think that's just something we always need to be conscious of, as we do enjoy the success that God has brought us here. And we do really believe that these people and the resources that are available to us are evidence of God's blessing. But let us never think that that's the only indicators. Let's always look deeper into the lives of people. And in fact, we're going to have some resources coming out in the future that will be designed to do just that. So stay tuned for more on that. The second question I think we should talk about in our groups is this: in what ways do you think we are influenced by the messages our culture sends us concerning wealth, possessions, and self-reliance? What can we do to avoid making the same mistakes the Laodiceans did? The Laodiceans were rebuked because they were trusting in their wealth, and in reality they were blind, poor, and naked. And so I think this is something that should really give us pause as a church. You've probably heard the old adage about a frog that's thrown into a boiling pot of water, that the frog will immediately jump out. That instead, if you put that same frog into a pot of cold water and slowly raise the heat until it boils, the frog won't jump out until it's boiled to death. Well, I think in some ways that's a helpful analogy to think about the way our culture affects us. And I think it probably affects us more than we probably realize in terms of how we think about wealth and possessions. So I think that's why it's very easy for us to justify spending large amounts of money on ourselves, but when we take that same amount of money and give it to the church, it has a much different perspective. I know I experienced this recently as we replaced a new TV, and how easily it was for me to drop $1,100 on this new TV. And while that same $1,100 looks a lot different when you put it into the offering box. So I think those are the things that we need to wrestle with. And we've had a great discussion in our group about that subject, and how do we know how much is enough, and how do we know that our hearts aren't really deceiving us when it comes to wealth and possessions. So I think this is a question we need to keep coming back to, because there really aren't easy answers to this. I do think, though, that in 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter really gets to the heart of the issue. And that verse, in verse 11, says this: "Since everything will be destroyed in this way, what sort of people ought you to be?" And I think that really is the key question. As we look in Revelation toward the end and the destruction of this present world, we need to keep that in mind as we evaluate how much time and effort we're investing in our possessions. So keep that question in front of your groups as we continue along through this series in Revelation. The last question that I suggest you look at is this. Jesus concludes his rebuke to the Laodiceans with a command to be committed and repent. So in what ways do you think their wealth was a hindrance to their level of commitment? And is the same thing true of us? And if so, in what ways? I think it's interesting that in the letter to Laodicea, there is no mention of suffering of any kind for the gospel. And I don't think that's probably a coincidence. I think the Laodiceans have become comfortable and they have become self-reliant. And probably the gospel, as it was proclaimed from them, was affected by this. In other words, the message that they were proclaiming wasn't really affecting anybody, and it wasn't offending anybody either. And so it's no wonder that they weren't suffering a lot of persecution because of their faith. So I think these questions should make us a little bit uncomfortable. You know, how much are these things true of us? And we really need to reflect and ask God to reveal, to give us some of that eye ointment that the Laodiceans were in need of, so that we can see ourselves clearly in light of these questions. So have fun with these discussions in your group. And again, we apologize for the lateness of the video. We'll do a better job next time. Thanks.